host, Ryan Richards, and today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Ben Carbone. Ben is the VP of Byrnes Commercial, serving as a commercial real estate advisor for his clients, and he is also a real estate investor. We talked today a lot about diving into commercial real estate. What is it? How are people finding deals in the current state of the market? How is Byrnes and himself advising clients? How are they helping them maximize potential and returns? What are some pitfalls that investors could fall into? We also talked through creative ways to make deals work, how to grow and scale, get into commercial multifamily, and learn a lot more about Ben Carbone and how he did it. Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Lens. Today I have Ben Carbone with me from Byrnes Real Estate Group. So thank you, Ben, for joining me today.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm stoked to pick your brain. I know you've had some awesome recent success in the market, and multifamily seems to be the topic of conversation today. So I know you'll have some good insight to share with us. But if you don't mind, for everyone listening, if you could give us some background on how'd you get into real estate, where are you today, and how have you seen your business evolve over time?
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of, fell into real estate almost. I was always watching and learning from my family who owned some real estate, nothing crazy. We weren't landlords or anything, but my grandfather was big into buying acres of land, and, he bought about 130 acres back in the 80s and then ended up selling off parcels and made great money. And that was able to sustain, a lot of my family, my grandmother throughout years, still to this day, where, that's pretty much what real estate is for, right? Is generational wealth. So I didn't really understand it back then. And then when I was 18, 19, I got involved in entrepreneurship. I was just getting into college. I ended up reading the infamous book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, as everyone knows. Absolutely. And I fell in love with the idea of assets over liabilities, right? And I was looking at my surroundings, my environment, and it seemed to be very heavily involved in liabilities. So I'm looking at it through a lens of how can I accumulate more assets? And then I began down the road of just absorbing information and trying to learn more and how to gain, capital, network, build relationships. And I kind of fell into this whole sphere of personal development. From there, graduated college. So I went to Nichols College, studied economics. So I kind of had an understanding of the base layer of, the Federal Reserve, how countries and micro and macroeconomics function in a particular area, how people make decisions based on, what's happening in the markets, and fell in love with that idea and then the math behind it. When I graduated college, I got into e-commerce, so kind of a totally different subset from real estate, but it was also sales, right? So I was building relationships, networking, building brands, and then I bought my first rental property back right before COVID hit in 2020.
Sure, I'm sure you're grateful of that for now.
Yeah, I mean,
and the marketing experience you gained from being in the e-commerce space, I'm sure, is something you still carry through.
Yeah, definitely. I ran all the advertisements for our companies, so we built brands, and I was on the backside running ads and handling all of that and getting creatives and whatnot. Similar to now, right? But I'm more on the frontal side where it's my personal self. So I was able to kind of intertwine that. But after I bought my first 4-family, I just jumped right in. Everyone's telling me, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. The moratorium hit. People aren't paying rent. They're scared. I remember my mother's like, it was like a week before closing. She's like, are you sure you want to do this? I was going, well, the thing is, I'm sitting on extra cash. Even if they don't pay rent, I will cover the mortgage. I'm going, there's no better time to invest than now, because I was obsessed with the assets over liabilities and the potential that this property had. So I was looking, rather than just initially a week out, 10 years out. What does this investment look like 10 years out? So I kind of set that vision, as to what it could look like and what it could be like and what it could produce for me and my family. So jumped right in, fell in love with the experience, just the dynamics and the techniques behind, managing a property, understanding CapEx, what went into it. The property needed a lot of work. We renovated 3 units out of the 4 within 2 years. So, right around that time, I ended up buying a second property. It was a gung-ho flip. Thought I knew everything. Didn't. Sure. Which is okay. Yeah. And I'm grateful for that experience now, but I definitely fell on my face, right? I thought I knew enough to get by, but I didn't have enough experience. I didn't have the people and the relationships that we talk about all the time that are important in order to get things done properly and make sure you don't lose your shirt. And I was very close to losing my shirt.
Well, I'm sure you're grateful for that experience for, well, a number of different reasons. Obviously, you learned, but fast forwarding to what you do today is having that perspective of going through it yourself, which I feel like in the commercial multifamily space, which I'll have you dive into in a moment, but that itself, without having that real world firsthand experience of going through it, there's a lot of those stumbling blocks that unfortunately your clients would have to face. But you've learned from those experiences, and now you're able to advise your clients, having not only been through it yourself, but built your own team to manage your stuff and ultimately help your clients. So
yeah, definitely. And it comes down to how many punches can you continue to take and how strong you become after you take those punches, right? So it's building that resilience, and it's okay to fail. It is. I think that, even if it's micro failures where they're small and it's a daily thing where you lose a deal or, you have to evict a tenant or something like that, that's still, in a way, in essence, a failure. But, I was very close to failing miserably. And I remember sweating and being nervous and sleepless nights as going, I could lose my property, all the cash in my bank, this property. And it was a difficult moment for about 2 or 3 months. And then I got creative and I was able to leverage my relationships and get people that I was connected with previously from going to investor meetups and all these other events at the time, and just talking online with people to come in and kind of, back me, which was a saving grace.
Absolutely. And I think from that standpoint too, when you go from going through the challenges yourself to having the systems and team around you to really solve them efficiently, it still doesn't change the fact that there's going to be problems.
Right.
Because ultimately I feel like that's real estate at its core, is being able to solve problems. And the good part, I feel, is the more you're able to solve harder problems, the better the returns can get and the more opportunities you have within a market, because you're not scared of a challenge.
100%.
You've seen it, you've heard it, or if you know nothing about it, you at least know someone you can call.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have that same mentality now that you advise your clients on, and you're able to not only get them in touch with the right people, but help them understand that facet too.
Yep. Yeah. So what I always tell people is we're in the business of finding solutions, and whatever those solutions may be, we can find them if we work together. If you have the right relationships, the right connections, like you say. The biggest thing that I always preach, and I'll get into it when we talk about commercial real estate and the facets behind finding deals, is it's relationships over transactions. And those relationships will go a long way in anything that you do, especially when you're going through a hard time or you have a failure or you need some kind of solution to get out of a particular situation, right? But I'll rewind and just get back into, okay, how to get into real estate now. Now, I'm going through these troubled times, and I'm at that moment, I'll never be a licensed real estate agent. I had family members that were licensed real estate agents that did very, very well in New Hampshire. And I was like, no, I'll never be a real estate agent. I just want to make my cash here, invest it into multifamily, and continue to do it that way. Some things happened in my life. My father got very sick. I was living in Boston at the time. I ended up moving home because my dad got sent back on hospice. So I moved out of Boston. I was living with a bunch of my business partners. Got a call one day, hey, we got to send your father home. I was like, all right, guys, I'm out. Packed my stuff, hopped in my car, drove back to Connecticut, and that was January of 2021. So I ended up finding myself back in my hometown, which wasn't a plan in any regard. I thought I was going to be in Boston and then Miami, and then, doing what I was doing on a higher level. And I found myself back in Connecticut, Windham County, where I went to elementary school and high school and even college around that area. And I was in a very odd place, right? My life shifted. I'm dealing with family issues. I still had the property with the failure at the time that I'm going through. So there's all these things spinning around. And I just remember sitting there and reflecting and going, okay, what didn't I like, or what don't I like about what I'm doing now? And why do I feel some kind of imbalance within me? And how can I correct that? The big thing for me is how I decided on getting into real estate is that e-commerce, I was a brand behind a brand. I was not the center face. And I didn't like that. And, we always talk about it. We send each other influencers and people that are making a dramatic impact. And what it is they are their personal brand. They are themselves, and they are selling themselves. And that's why they have so much leverage in the marketplace. So I was sitting there, I'm going, how can I make an impact for myself, for my family, for my community, and build as many relationships as possible? Real estate. Become a real estate agent. Funny enough, I said I would never be one. And I ended up meeting my previous broker at the time, pretty wildly. She said, hey, I know you invest in real estate. Let's get together and talk about real estate. I have some properties that might interest you. Sat down, and I go, so what do you got? Gave me a couple properties. She's like, I'm like, let me ask you a question. She goes, yeah, what? How long would it take me to get licensed in real estate? She goes, you can do it in a couple months. Like, pretty easy. I think you can get it done pretty fast. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it. So the next day, signed up for the course, took the course. 3 months later, passed the test, and I was licensed March of 2022.
It's funny how it happens like that. But when you first started there, you didn't start in commercial real estate. You were more, is that focused on residential?
Yeah.
Talk about that transition, if you could, a little bit.
Sure. So I definitely just got into the game, and what I wanted to do was absorb as much information. So for me, it's a learning curve, and you want to expedite that learning curve as much as you can. So rather than taking 6 months or 12 months to learn as much as I could about contracts, appraisals, inspections, every facet that goes into a deal, I can press that into about 2 months. And while I was taking my course and I was getting licensed, I made sure that I went on every single appointment that I could with somebody. I absorbed information, I studied contracts, I talked to people, because I just wanted to get into the game and fly. So I got into it, and I would take anything and everything that would come my way. And obviously, being from the town that I was from, it's very small. It's a beautiful area, but everyone is interconnected. So I had a lot of connections there. My mom's family has been there their entire lives, about 80 years. So, I had those connections, and I go, I'm just going to take what I can get. And it was buyers, friends, family, all in the residential realm. But I had a knack for multifamily, and I love multifamily, and I want to continue to invest in multifamily. So I did pretty much residential solely for about 6 months in my first year, and then it really started to pick up where I was getting multifamily leads, connecting with more investors, bigger properties, and it was just where my heart was.
And when you say, I know you and I use commercial and residential, commercial and multifamily rather interchangeably.
Yep.
But what is commercial real estate, and how does that tie into multifamily from someone who might not, understand really the context of the word? And really, furthermore, if you're talking commercial real estate as an agent, how different is that than looking at real estate from a residential lens? So what's the difference between the two, and how would you tie commercial real estate into it and define it in that sense?
Sure. Residential is particularly, the way that I think about it is single family homes. So one door, right? But you can also spread it to 2 to 4 doors where you're buying multifamily, but it really depends on the dynamic of the client. When we talk about commercial real estate is very involved, and there's so many different industries within the industry of commercial real estate. Now, a lot of people think solely, retail, industrial, warehouse, office space, medical office space. It could be large parcels of land and development. But, multifamily is something that is heavily underlooked in commercial real estate. You can look at like A-class multifamilies where it's 300 unit high rises like they're building in Worcester right now. But, my sole essential focus and specialty currently is multifamily portfolios, 5 units plus. So you can define it in that way, right? You have residential, it's a single family home, 2 through 4 units. Commercial is 5 units plus on a multifamily scale.
Sure.
Yeah.
And from your perspective as an agent, obviously the intricacies of commercial make an advisor that much more important. So how do you look at commercial from your standpoint when you're advising clients? What types of things would you look at in commercial that you might not otherwise consider if you were someone who was buying residential? How would you advise someone in those two situations?
Sure. So the way that I frame myself, and I always tell people this, is that I'm not your agent, I'm your advisor. And what I mean is that I'll sit down with you and go through a comprehensive plan. So everybody's plan is different. It's like a financial advisor, right? It's situational basis. With commercial real estate, you really got to know their profile. Okay, where are they currently at? How much capital do they have? Do they have other properties? What's their equity like? Where do they want to buy? What is their goal? Right? So there's so many different things that go into it that then align you to the particular properties that they can purchase. When I sit down with them and I tell them and I advise them based on commercial real estate, it really is based on, particular indicators that we evaluate when we underwrite a property. Once you get into those higher portfolio counts or just one-off buildings, it would be your cap rate, which is a temperature gauge. And a lot of people do go off of cap rates. Personally, cap rates don't mean so much to me. They kind of give me an idea and a basis as to how that property is performing, and then where the appraisal might come in and how you can evaluate it off that. But the cash on cash return is incredibly important to me, incredibly important to the way that I position my clients, because I want to show them current cash on cash return, which is essentially how much money are you putting into this deal and how much money are you getting back on a yearly basis. So I put in $100,000 and I make $10,000 a year, essentially you will get your money back in 10 years. It's a 10% return. So if that was current, what does it look like projected, right? So you buy a property, your current rent is X, your return is 10% at purchase. Great return. You're not seeing that really anywhere. And then projected, what could it be if you go in, renovate, increase rents, increase the value of the property? Could you get it to 15%? Most likely, yes, if it's a value-add property.
And when you say, cash on cash return, obviously you're looking at it, like you said, from the perspective, how quickly can I get my money back?
Yep.
And that really becomes important when you're looking at scaling, because
Definitely.
It becomes the velocity of money. How quickly can I get back my capital to go redeploy it to other assets that will generate me more?
Yep.
And when you look at it from the commercial lens, that's something you often talk about with your investors, I would imagine, is not only do I want to buy this one property, well, what other resources do you have in terms of assets that we can look at as a whole, from a holistic perspective, to reallocate where your money is so that wherever it's going to work, you're getting the most amount of cash possible back so you can go continue to invest more.
Absolutely.
And from that perspective, I would imagine, Byrnes obviously made the move to Byrnes, and if that must have had a good synergy with what you're trying, what you do now, which is the level of resources you have around you, whether it's property management, in-house, having the resources of investors that rely heavily on you, having that network. So how has Byrnes played into, your ability to manage those types of situations? Because there's a lot more contacts you need, there's a lot more intricacies. How does Byrnes look at it that might be different than others when you're advising clients and just the network you have that serves them?
Yeah, so Byrnes, incredible organization, and the owner, Mike Byrnes, got to give a shout out to him. Brilliant visionary, understands how to put people in the right place to make them successful, but then also make the rest of the team successful, right? So we're very dynamic, we're young, we're hungry, we're hustlers. We look at the marketplace like we can take this over and own it for the next 40 years. And we're doing so, right? We're moving very quickly. We have a great team. We have great staff. We have great agents behind us. And, we all collaborate. The big thing for us is ecosystem. And the way that we look at it, like you said, is how can we give our clients and ourselves as many resources as possible to win the deal, to, help curate future success for everyone that's involved, whether it's you as a client, me as an agent, Mike as the owner. And really what it comes down to is just, we have the team behind us, but also the resources and understanding and the education and experience. So if I bring in a client and they are sitting on a mountain of cash, I'm their advisor to help them buy a portfolio or buy their first multifamily property. I can then pass that along to our property management division to ecosystem it, to keep it all in-house. So they get me for the sales, for the advisory. They get Byrnes Property Management, which I'm heavily involved in, for their management of their property, because they may not understand how to manage it, they may not want to, they may not have the time, which is fine, which is perfectly fine. That's our goal, is to give them that white glove service where we take care of everything for them. So we then take that, buy that pass it off to Byrnes Property Management. They handle everything. They put them in the right position for future, right? So we come in, buy the property, say rents are under market, the value's solid, but not where it could be, raise the rents on the property management side, increase the value of the property. Then we can take that and go, okay, this is your position on a yearly review. What would you like to do with this amount of equity? We could take this $150,000 worth of equity, tap it in a HELOC, home equity line, or refinance, and then buy another property. And it goes right back through the system.
And having that property management in-house, I would imagine, for a client becomes a lot easier to manage a property that might not be in optimal condition. So it allows someone to come in who might not have the experience stabilizing properties and bringing them back to full market potential. But because you have that arm of the business, it could make a lot of people more apt to see more deals. And I feel like that's a point in this market that people are running into as a challenge. You know, everyone's looking for, well, not everyone. I mean, everyone's idea of a good deal is different. Yeah. But having the resource to be able to take down a property that might not be within your capability to manage, you know, maybe the tenants are troubled, maybe it needs a lot of value add. You have to go through, redo most of the units, work on some of the mechanicals. Yep. You know, those are big projects.
Absolutely.
Especially dealing with turnover. So having that arm of the business, I would imagine, is incredibly helpful. And from that, I mean, for those clients who are stuck in that position, right? I'm sure you've seen it on social media or just talking to people. Nothing pencils. You know, no deal works. But with having that ability to have some property management and help with stabilizing a property, how do you advise clients on finding their deal criteria? Because I know that every investor has their different idea of a good deal. And you might, more often than not, I find some people are looking in the wrong markets for what's important to them. You know, if you want a cash-on-cash return, that's a different market than if you're looking for a long-term appreciation.
Absolutely.
So how would you say you advise people on finding the right deal for you? And what does that mean for the market? And how do you help find them the right direction based on what they're looking for?
Yeah, so it's really a process, right? I want to sit down with that person, with that investor, and understand where they're currently at. And they could be someone that's freshly new to the game. They're sitting on cash that they built up, or they have, you know, a lot of equity in their personal home and they can pull a HELOC out it. Or it's somebody with a lot of experience that they're looking for something new, or they're looking to reinvest a lot of their equity that they built over the last 4 years, because we've seen, you know, a 47% increase in value over the last 4 years since COVID. So there's a lot of equity out there for people that have held properties since then or bought before then. So I really sit down with them. You know, I get a feel for who they are, their strengths, their weaknesses, right? So it's holistic. It's not just what are the numbers, what's your property, where are your properties. I have to understand the investor, because then I can really put them in a position to win. If I don't know the dynamics of who they are and their personality and what they can handle, I'm not going to be able to put them in a situation that, you know, otherwise wouldn't benefit them. If somebody, you know, isn't able to handle the communication with tenants, even though we have the property management division, or, you know, multiple evictions at a property that then there's a value add, I'm not going to bring them to that property. You know, I might have another client that fits better, where, you know, someone like Mike Byrnes, for instance, if there's 3 evictions that need to be had at this property, that's his property. He'll take care of it, no problem. You know, he'll go in Gestapo and kick them out. But for, you know, I really want to sit down, understand them. And then the next thing is their financial profile. So it could be, how much cash do you have? What are you comfortable with spending? Do you have any other types of reserves that you can tap into? Do you have partners? Do you have family that can cut you checks? Or do you have a portfolio of properties? Do you have a ton of equity? Could we blanket that in a refinance, pull out all that equity, and then go buy something else? Or what we like to call it at Byrnes are trade pieces. So trade pieces to us are 2, 3, and 4 families when you have larger unit portfolio sizes. So what that means is you bought, you know, say a 20-unit portfolio, and you have 2, 3 families that you bought at $100,000 a door. Well, now 3 families are trading much, much higher than $100,000 a door. So can you sell those at market price, make $200,000 per building, and then 1031 that into something else? So it really comes down to who they are and their profile completely. But we sit down, comprehensive plan. What are their goals now? What are their goals in 5 years? What are their goals in 10 years? And then we take that back and we go to the drawing board and we go, okay, this is the market that we're going to look in based on that criteria. And it could be Lower Worcester County where you see a heavy cash on cash return and you're able to add value. You do see slight appreciation. It's at about 3 to 5% a year right now. I mean, over the last 4 years, different, but I would say on average for the next 5 years, it should be about 3 to 5%. That's just statistically speaking. If they want to just park cash at a 4% cap rate and hope for appreciation that's going to continue in an area like Boston, then sure. But for me, because I'm also an investor, not just an agent, I'm heavy on cash return. That you see some slight appreciation, but also I want to build my cash flow. I want to build my nest egg. I want to take that cash flow and reinvest it in the future or reinvest it in other investment strategies. So it really depends on, I would say, who they are, financial situation, their portfolio, but also their age, right? So someone like us, 25 and 26, we're probably heavy on cash flow. Appreciation, it's a beautiful thing. We'll see appreciation, though, because we're going to live, on average, 60 more years. So every 10 years, real estate is going to double, right? On average.
Right.
So it's like, we look at it and it's like, okay, we can withstand that and hold out and go, okay, in 30 years, my property is going to be worth $1 million.
Which is great, but that's a future thought.
Yeah.
I want to be able to have multiple properties that become not worth one, but worth 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
In order to do that, you need cash.
Need cash.
And I feel like that is a big piece of commercial real estate that differs from residential multifamily, is the ability to multiply your cash at larger scale.
Yeah.
Which, curious what your thoughts are on how commercial real estate is evaluated from the underwriting perspective, given that the value of commercial real estate in the commercial multifamily sector is different than residential. Residential is based on comps. It's based on what properties have sold in the area, compare the properties together, look at their condition, their quality, their size, the square footage, and try to determine what your value is worth relative to others.
Right.
But what's unique about commercial, and I'm curious what your process looks like as you advise clients on underwriting, but you're able to force the value naturally through rent increases, through what we call stabilizing the property. Going into the property, making sure the tenants, you maximize the rent potential, you put the property in a good position to minimize the expenses, reducing expenses. Maybe you're shifting around utilities, whatever the case may be. But that in and of itself becomes a multiple of how commercial is traded. If you go into a property that's $10,000 a month in rent, you raise it to $15,000, that property becomes worth more to investors. It
certainly does.
So how do you talk through that process with investors, and what's your philosophy behind the benefit of commercial and scaling, because you can stabilize and create value through your own work?
Yeah. So the way that I like to frame it and what I call it, and what I've actually called it this, even when I was just in residential multifamily, when I bought my first one, it was kind of funny. I think I heard the term somewhere on a podcast, but forced appreciation. So with commercial real estate and multifamily, like you said, the property is evaluated and given its value based on the income of the property and the condition of the property. It's not so much comparables. Yes, they do use that as somewhat of a weight, but recently I've talked to a lot of appraisers, and typically it's about 5 to 10% of the weight of the appraised value, and 90% of it is the income approach. So if you have solid income at the property, then you're going to see a higher valuation. But the way that I advise clients is, listen, we're in this beautiful spot right now in the market where there's a lot of young investors and there's a ton of older investors that are in their late 50s and 60s and early 70s. They bought at a time where they can keep their rents very, very low because they do not have high debt service. Their rates might be low. Maybe they don't owe anything on the properties at all. So whatever they're bringing in monthly is income to them. So I'd frame it this way. If we find a seller and they've owned this property for 20 or 30 years, their rents are going to be significantly low, statistically speaking. That's what I've seen in the market through and through over the last 2 years. It's just what it is, and it's fine. So that's an opportunity for us to come in, buy that property at, say, that the units are at $1,000 a month for 2 beds, 6 family, right? They don't need a lot. That's $6,000 a month. We can come in, raise those rents to about $1,500, $1,600, which is market in Lower Worcester County region, and you would be producing $9,000 a month. So your valuation just increased from a $6,000 a month, $72,000 a year to $9,000 a month, $98,000 a year, which increases the value of the property even further for you. So once you buy that 6 to 12 months after the fact, you can go get it reappraised from the bank, show them what you've done, the renovations that you made, the stabilization that incurred, and then where the rents are and where the income is. And you could potentially see a high increase in equity.
Which could allow you to pull your cash out and then have it for resources to accelerate and buy more.
Right, which is leverageability, which is what we're always looking for.
Exactly.
How much cash can we extract from a property, or how much little cash can we put into a deal to buy that property, then to extract more cash to buy another property? Multiplication effect.
Exactly. Yeah. And do you find in the commercial space, obviously, do you think that becomes easier? Not easier in the sense of work. I mean, work, no matter, if you're looking for returns, you're going to have to put in work. But do you see that once you're able to get the cash resources to do some of those commercial deals, can your multiplication happen faster than if you were buying residential properties?
It definitely can. And, it could happen just from that standpoint where you're raising your equity value, but it also could happen just from your monthly cash flow. Your monthly cash flow could be significantly higher at a commercial property than a residential property because there's more doors there. So you could be making $3,000 a month at one property. That's $36,000 a year. You could use that hypothetically to then buy another property. So in the more properties that you have with a higher cash flow, it comes down into an operating account, and then you can kind of pool that up and buy another property with that. So there's multiple ways that commercial real estate, 5 units plus, are just more beneficial. More doors under one roof, less CapEx, less maintenance costs. If you have 2-3 families rather than 1-6 family, sure, the value is going to be there because you're going to see it over 2 properties, but your maintenance costs are more, your taxes, your insurance, double. If you buy a 6 family, it's all under one roof. You only have to worry about that one property. So there's benefit to that.
So for the people listening who are like, commercial's great. You're telling me I can go in, I can get instant equity, I can raise the rents, I can get my cash back. Yeah. It's all under one roof. It's easier to manage. Well, what are some of the barriers that people run into trying to get into commercial real estate? Is it having the cash amount required? Is it not understanding how to find these deals, how to operate them? What pieces would some people be missing who are saying, I'd love to get into commercial real estate. That sounds great. But what are some things I need to make sure I have in place, and how can I overcome those challenges so I can get into this space as an investor?
Yeah, so I would say that it's threefold. Number one is having the awareness and mindset and understanding of what it takes to buy properties at a commercial level. It's not so different than buying a 3-family, but you are dealing with more tenants. You are dealing with more protocol that could happen that could come from a bank. There's more liability in a sense because you do have more doors there. There's less risk in a way of vacancy, but also more risk in the way of having more tenants at a property and more damages and more repairs and things like that. So you really want to be able to develop yourself and strengthen your mindset as to understanding, okay, this is where I'm going to be. This is what I have to take on. And it could come from experience. It could come from finding a mentor. And I'll tell you right now, you find a mentor, it's going to accelerate your process even faster. I can give a huge shout out to Mike Byrnes. I know I've shouted him out a few times on this podcast, but ever since kind of getting integrated with him and his processes and seeing how he operates his portfolio of 250 doors, I've exponentially grown my portfolio. So Absolutely. It's being around the right people, it's building the right mindset, it's walking as many deals as you possibly can before you jump into it. And then the second thing is the finances. You need to understand that yes, there's ways to get creative in commercial real estate, which is kind of high level, but on a basic level, you need 20 to 25% down on a property. If you're going to buy a $500,000 5-family, which is a fair price, about $100,000.
Send it over.
Yeah, I got you. But about $100,000 or $125,000 on average without closing costs, and you're going to need some cash reserves for potential repairs. If you only have $120,000 and you're going to put $100,000 into this property, you might want to reevaluate as to what you're doing.
So if you're someone who's listening and you're like, I don't have $100,000, what are some other ways? Can you get creative with how you finance things? Being in the commercial space, obviously, as myself as an investor and having gone through the process and doing what I do as a residential lender, I understand that commercial can tend to be more flexible because they're not necessarily tied to the rules of the secondary market. There's no overarching standard of guidelines. There's obviously bank regulations, but talk a little bit about that. Is there something that you would advise people to consider in that scenario? Are there ways to reduce how much cash you need to buy commercial real estate?
Yeah, sure. So in commercial real estate, right, they like to say it's a global perspective. All the banks like to say, we look at it as a global perspective, a global real estate perspective. And what that is essentially is that they care about every facet that goes into you purchasing this property, but they do care less about you personally as the person buying the property. Their main focus is the property. What does the property look like? What is the condition? Does it produce money? What are the expenses like? The overall arching idea as to how that property performs in the marketplace currently and how it could perform in, a year, 5 years, right? So we call that pro forma. Yourself, yes, you do matter, of course, but less than you do matter in residential real estate. There's a lot of intricacies that go into buying a residential home or a 2 through 4 unit in a residential mortgage, as you know.
Sure.
But in here, it's just pretty much, what does your profile look like? What are your cash reserves? Do you have experience? What is your profession? That could lean a lot as to, whether they grant you a loan or not, because if you are in real estate and you actively do real estate on a daily basis, I think you're more favorable than someone that might just be over in, finance that has no idea as to what's happening in the real estate market. If you have a ton of cash, cool. But that's kind of the base layer. And, ways to get creative. If you build relationships with these banks, and like I say, relationships is everything, especially finding deals, but also with the banking institutions, if you build relationships with these local banks, and I wouldn't say go to a global bank, there are some benefits to TD and Bank of America, but you want that more personalized touch. Local banks in your region. So in Worcester County, you go Cornerstone, Unibank, Webster First, those types of banks. In Windham County, there's a couple others, Bank Hometown, Centerville, Jewett City, but build relationships with those bankers because they're going to give you as many opportunities as you can get, and then they're going to give you even more creative solutions as to how to finance deals. So, one thing is you can seller finance an entire property. So the seller holds the entire note because they don't owe any debt on the property. You put little money in. They're the lien holder. They're the bank, the seller. That's one way to get into real estate for a little money down. So, 5, 10, 15% of a property.
And for someone listening, why would a seller want to do that? Because when most people think of selling property, they're like, they're going to get cash.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other things that go into it that would make a seller want to entertain that.
Right.
So what are some of those things that you would hit on as reasons why a seller would consider it? And then how important is it to have someone on your team who can make them understand that?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is tax burden. What happens with these sellers that have owned property for 30 years, they've used all their depreciation over the course of owning the property, and they have to pay a recapture tax on top of capital gains. And depending on where they are and what state they're in, there could be a millionaire's tax if they have a hefty portfolio. So, the fundamental thing it comes down to for these sellers is taxes and tax liability. Because if they sell a property and they own it outright for $500,000, sure, they could get $500,000, but about 50% of that is going to go back to the federal government or the state government. So they just lost half of their shirt at their sale. If they seller finance the property over the course of 20 or 30 years, sure, they're going to pay capital gains, but it's going to be reduced in increments over the course of that loan term. And then also they're earning interest on top of their money that they're holding because they are the bank. So they're earning 7% interest on $400,000 or $450,000 over the course of 20 years. They're going to make some extra capital on top of that, and they're going to pay less taxes over the course of time. So that's the reason that they would do that.
And how important is it to have someone on your team who can make a seller understand that? Because even if you've owned real estate, seller financing becomes almost like a foreign subject.
It does.
People really don't understand those benefits and why it could be advantageous or how it could make a deal work.
Yep.
It doesn't always have to be, I want to buy your property for $500,000. I'll give you 10%. I'll give you $50,000. You hold $450 in paper. It doesn't always have to be, that cut and dry. There can be many different variations.
Absolutely.
But it comes down to having someone who can relay that to a seller. And
Yeah.
how important is that piece in the puzzle.
It's vital. It is vital. The biggest thing that comes behind relationships is education, and you have to be able to educate the people that you're doing a deal with, a seller, a buyer, whoever it may be. But most importantly, in this situation with the seller financing, is you want to draw them out what the picture looks like, so that they don't feel like they're getting skated, or that they don't fully grasp the idea of it, because most of the times, some of these people don't understand what it could be. But if you're able to lay it out and show them this is the reason that it's most beneficial for you, it changes everything. And it changes everything for your client. It changes everything for you. And the big thing, I personally look for seller financing on every single deal, because I have a relationship with a bank where I'm able to leverage if the seller holds a certain amount in a seller note, right? And I can tell them, hey, I'll give you X price, but I'm buying it outright, significantly less. Or I'll give you this price, the price that you want, if you hold 10% and you earn interest on this 10%. And most of the time, everyone is open to it because they're earning extra capital. It's kind of like, oh, I get this extra $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 in 5 years. That'll be great, whatever. And then I can go to the bank and I can use that as leverageability. I can then put less money down, 10, 15%.
Which that can not only, of course, help you, but it can help bridge the gap between a deal that otherwise wouldn't have happened to make it come together.
Absolutely.
So you save the cash, but if you're off on price and your agent doesn't have the ability to present that as an option, one, you could miss out on a great deal. But two, the next property you buy, or if you were to strike that deal, you're going to put a lot more cash into it.
Absolutely.
So I think that's another piece that is often missed, is it's not just to save money. It's to make deals happen. If I offered you $1 million for your property, like I want 1.2, how can we bridge this gap? Maybe we can find some seller debt structure, that works. I'll pay you 1.2, but I want 200,000 in a note.
Absolutely. And then sometimes, like I just fell into the situation where seller wanted a property for 1.5. Math didn't math. Typically how it is in this market.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Sellers want X, it's worth Y based on the numbers, rates are crazy. But, we came to them and we go, this is the situation, this is the value of the property now, but I understand you want this number. We are at this number. If you hold X amount in a seller's note at this rate, over the course of this time period of 15 or 20 years, you will then make that purchase price that you originally wanted. So it's a different way to frame it. And we sat down and educated him as to how it looked. And he goes, oh, well, why wouldn't I just wait? Yeah,
Exactly.
why wouldn't you?
Exactly.
You're going to get the same price. It's just over the length of time. And then it gives my client the ability to actually purchase that deal, see a return initially at that purchase. And then it gives the bank more favorable terms to give him. So it's a win-win-win.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think for some, there's a great opportunity within that now because of the equity created over the past few years. And I'd imagine, within the market, as you mentioned, a lot of the opportunities are with those older operators, people who are fed up dealing with problems. And as we were talking earlier, problems are a natural facet of real estate. And the better you can get at solving them, not only on the property management side, but on the acquisition side, having the ability to bridge the gap and come up with a creative solution to make deals happen, I think is definitely important in this market. But to that point, as you're looking for deals for your clients, what are some opportunities you see in this market, and how are some of your clients taking advantage of them?
The market is interesting. I will put it that way. And the summer months, right around this time, there seems to be a lull. The reason for that is kids graduate, vacation, traveling, the heat, whatever it may be. But regardless of that, if I'm talking the MLS. The MLS is one thing. But there's always opportunities out there in the marketplace. And what it comes down to, again, I'm going to say it and I'm going to drill it home, is relationships. The more relationships that you can build and create, the more advantage you're going to have in any career that you're in, but especially real estate. Because Ryan's one person that knows 3 people. It's the rules of 3. Those 3 people know 9 people. Those 9 people know 27 people. The rules of 3 continue. So the more relationships you build, the more ability you have to extract information, to get deals, to then find some common ground and make deals happen for your clients. So what we are at Byrnes Commercial, and especially myself, is we're predicated on building those relationships and finding those off-market opportunities because we have relationships with sellers, appraisers, insurance agents, lawyers, whoever it may be. We don't solely rely on the MLS. Sure, there's deals that come on the MLS, but typically what it is we get an inside edge from somebody that we know in the marketplace, or we're cold calling and we're building those relationships on the phone. And then we're able to bridge that gap and give those opportunities directly to our clients. So rather than them being out in the marketplace competing with hundreds of other people and other investors that have more cash or cash heavy, or they're just ready to strike and we need more time, we're able to then take it on the backside, keep it in-house in our ecosystem, and make a deal happen and get creative in any way that we can, because we had the relationship on this side, we have the relationship on this side, and we're matchmakers and we're trying to bring them together. So, there's plenty of opportunities out there. It really just comes down to, one, how creative can you get? Two, how many opportunities can you create? Because the more opportunities that you can create, obviously, the more opportunities there are for the people that you're looking for. And, it's pretty much just continuing to grind and make sure that you stay focused on not just transactions, but the relationships. Yeah.
And as a client, as someone who's looking to invest, you have to know what you want too.
You do.
If I came to you and said, I want a great deal, you're going to say, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So defining your criteria.
Yep.
But I do feel, in the commercial space, that's something that's unique in comparing, when looking just at multifamily. When you say commercial, and you look at the residential side of multifamily, that 1 to 4, or being in that 5-unit plus or portfolio space, I feel like that's unique in the sense of the amount of off-market deals. Because people say, deal volume's down, and people aren't buying relative to years past. There's no inventory. But looking at your presence on social media, what you've done for deals, investors are very active.
Very active.
So I feel like when you look at the headline news, especially in the commercial multifamily space, it's hard to get a gauge on the market.
It really is.
As someone who's on the outside trying to figure out what's going on, why are there no deals? People say, oh, rates are high. But yes, rates influence things, but you'll see that people are really still buying deals, which, the off-market opportunities, as you mentioned, are definitely very abundant in commercial space right now, and especially within, those properties that have challenges. They're sitting there for a long time, they're looking at things, and I'm curious because I've heard, I'm sure you've seen it on the news, right? Commercial real estate's going to crash. But with this amount of transactions going on in this commercial space, how would you respond to the headline of commercial real estate's going to crash? The notes are becoming due. How do you see the market playing out for the rest of the year? Especially, and to that point, I will clarify, there's got to be a difference, right? Because commercial can't just be all encompassing. So how do you see the market playing out, and is it different? Are different, of course, asset classes going to work differently?
Sure. I think the way that we have to look at it is breaking it up, but everyone's going to pool commercial real estate as commercial real estate, like you said. They're going to take the multifamily, the warehouse, the industrial, the office, the retail, and put it all in one, which is fine. But we really have to section it off. And the way that I see commercial real estate crashing, in essence, is heavy office buildings, maybe very large multifamily, like I'm talking 500 to 1,000 unit complexes that were purchased back previously when rates were about 3% and they overpaid for the deal, right? It's going to be subjective to operators that did not do the proper due diligence. I think that large holders in multifamily and large holders in real estate that understood what the property was and the potential of the property are going to be fine. But those operators that just went gung-ho, raised a bunch of capital, bought this multifamily property because they saw, it produced a 7 or 8% cash-on-cash return when the rates were 3%, and now when they're 7.5% and their note's coming due and they have to refinance into a 7%, rate, and they're getting a 0% return, different story. That's only I don't think it's going to crash. I think it's going to create more opportunity, and more opportunity for people that are solid operators and people that understand the marketplace and understand what it takes to, hold heavy real estate. Now, that's talking high level, big time real estate in the commercial realm. On the smaller side, where we're talking just, 20 unit portfolios in New England, 50 unit portfolios in New England, where they're all scattered in their separatized buildings, or just single multifamily buildings, I only see those prices continuing to rise. And the reason for that is because on the residential side, single family homes are getting more and more expensive. mortgages are becoming more and more expensive. So what are people resulting to, and what are they doing? They're renting. They're offsetting buying a home because of where rates are and where prices are, so they're renting. Rental prices in multifamily real estate are only increasing, which then in commercial multifamily real estate increases the values. So if we're seeing more income in the smaller multifamily sector, we're going to see higher prices. So, it's dynamic. It's ever moving. Sure, could there be a massive bubble that none of us are seeing? It's possible. But
look at COVID,
Yeah, right.
Of course, there's unforeseen factors.
Right, but I only think that the one sector that's going to be affected, and it's going to be subjective, is office space, retail. Retail's tough. Just because, there aren't enough tenants to fill spaces, and with those spaces being vacant, owners can't essentially pay their debt service. And when notes come due, because typically they're 5, 10, 15-year ARMs, and if they're at a 5-year ARM and they bought in 2019, it's coming due now. Their rate was 3, now it's going to be 7.5. It's a big difference on millions of dollars worth of real estate.
On leases in retail that could have been written 10 years ago on 25-year terms, and yes, now that adjustment, you can't necessarily raise the rent.
No.
So
yeah,
I think there's going
to be difficulty. I think we're going to see a shift in the market. I don't think we're going to see a major crash. I think we could see heavy cities get affected in that larger building space, but nothing up here where it's smaller and less dense.
Absolutely. I think it's funny too when you talk to someone like yourself who's in the market doing deals, helping people do deals. Your perspective is there's opportunity, and obviously you're bullish on some of the sectors around here and relative to the different classes. But I am too. So I think a lot of times on social media you'll see the headlines of commercial real estate's going to crash or rates are at all-time highs, and people get scared. But the reality is investors are always going to buy deals.
Always.
There's always deals to be had.
Yeah.
But that's why you need to find the right team to get creative and help you take your buy criteria and make deals happen.
Absolutely.
And repurposing properties or looking at condo conversions, whatever the case may be. But there's always opportunity. I think it's just you have to have the right people to help you find the one you're looking for, because you might not even realize there's a good deal right in front of you.
Right.
But someone comes in and says, hey, wait a minute. We can take this 6-unit, we can condoize it out, we can sell it. We can make some money going that route.
Yeah.
Or all sorts of different opportunities with ADUs are becoming popular now.
Yep.
Subdividing land is becoming popular. Finding those other
or even office
resources.
space, and then you can make kind of a mixed use facility out of it. I'm actually looking at one now, not personally, but for a client, and it seems to be that it's a route we're going to go. And there's a huge value add there that most people overlook, but it's about getting creative and understanding that, hey, there's more ways to look at a deal than just one way.
Absolutely.
And people get, stuck in that tunnel. But I just want to touch on this because you keep saying, investors are always going to buy. And I remember when I first got into being a licensed agent and I was looking at, the deal flows. And I'm saying commercial, multifamily, residential. You look at the life cycle of residential, it's every 5 years that one person is going to buy a home on average, sell and buy a home on average. In commercial real estate, multifamily, when you get one investor, that one investor is most likely going to buy 3 to 5 times a year. If you get someone that's very bullish and very aggressive, they could buy unlimited times in a year if you give them opportunities.
Sure.
So the way I looked at it, I go, okay, if I meet 10 people, they might buy 10 homes from me this year, but they're not buying for another 5 years. If I meet 2 investors, they're going to buy 10 homes in this 1 year, and they're going to continue to buy 10 homes every year for the next 10 years. So I wanted more volume in that sense with a higher deal flow rather than just building a massive sphere and waiting those 3 to 5 years for them to buy.
That's a smart way to think about it. And as time goes on, as they build their portfolios, I'm sure there's interchanging, going on within those investors. It becomes, the snowball effect like we're talking about with scaling, but within, the deal flow and volume. So
yeah.
I think it's a great way to look at it.
Absolutely.
But as we wrap things up, I do want to ask for the audience, what does your ideal client look like? If someone was to say, why would I use Ben Carbone? What's your answer for who can you best help and how can you best serve them?
My ideal client would be somebody that is investor savvy and open to learning, right? And they don't even have to be investor savvy. They can just be open to learning, and they have a knack and an understanding as to what it may take to get involved in, multifamily investment or just investment in general. And it could be somebody that doesn't have any units, but they are very motivated to build a portfolio and they have a vision. I think it's very important to have goals. Write down your goals, but also have an idea and a sense as to where you're going to be in the future. And then also other people that have, 30, 80, 100, 250 doors. A lot of the times they get stuck in a particular area because they don't know how to use creative solutions to get out of where they are, which if they're at 30 doors, how can you scale to 100 doors in the next 3 years? You can do it very quickly if you do it right. So anybody really, I'd like to sit down with them and just give them a plan. Sit down and say, what are your goals? What do you want to do? Do you want to leave your job? If you want to leave your job in 5 years, this is the avenue we have to go. If you want to go from 30 to 100 doors in the next 5 years, this is what we have to do. So it's really, it's kind of open. And I'm also not afraid to get involved with first-time home buyers that want to buy their first multifamily and house hack it. Sure. I've done it. You've done it. I have friends that are doing it. We hold seminars for kids that want to do it, that we want to educate on how to do it. So, it's kind of broad, but anybody that is willing to just invest time and learn.
And I think that's, I'm sure, resonates with people. Everyone's is somewhere in that space where they're stuck. They're like, I want to get to 100 units. How do I get there? Or I want to buy that first house hack multifamily, but I don't know where to start. And it's nice to be able to have someone who can sit down, walk you through an actionable plan versus talking, on Instagram. You can hear a lot of people talk broad picture, and it becomes difficult to actually take the steps to get there. So, well, it's been a pleasure having you on today, Ben. I'm sure there's a lot of information people are taking. Last thing I want to leave people with is 3 books that you've felt have had the most impact on your business.
3 books. So I'm big into personal development, and it's not only, success and motivation and real estate, but also intertwined with spirituality. I think it's very important to be connected with your spiritual self and understand who you are as a person and what drives you and, what your why is internally. So number 1, a great book for motivation and just understanding that there's, a different level to us is Winning by Tim Grover. Just very dynamic writer. He's a personal development coach, Coach Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. Just phenomenal book. Number 2 would be The Science of Being and Art of Living by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So this is really fundamental to my core. My dad taught me how to meditate, transcendental meditation, when I was 17 years old. So I've been meditating every day, twice a day, for the last 9 years. And this book is a foundational pillar within the transcendental meditation community. So it's not only about meditation, it's about how to live the right life, how to think right, how to act right, how to speak right, how to have and develop an emotional self. So it's really, really just encompassing everything about a human life and how you can project that in the outer world. And I think really what you project into the world is what you receive back. So it's reciprocity. You know what I mean? So if you're a particular way and you're happy, you're go-lucky, you're optimistic, you're going to attract that back to you in people, in ideas, in success. So super, super great book. And then number 3, it teeters between these two. But I would say Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It's just, again, it's about thinking and growing rich, but it's how to frame your subconscious and your mindset to look at opportunities and continue to delve deeper into yourself to develop your outer self to see success. So, personal development I'm big on, but you need to, think about your emotional intelligence and your spiritual self for sure.
That's great. That reminds me of the red car theory.
Yeah.
If I said I'd give you $100 for every red car you saw today, I'm sure you'd find some.
Of course.
But otherwise you miss the opportunities, and that's, I think a similar comparison in terms of framing your mindset. So
yeah, man.
Awesome. Well, Ben, I appreciate you sharing, man. It's been a pleasure.
Look
forward to having you on again soon.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.